To create our code, we do that in the project with our other objects that we created before, but you select the Create button and drop it down and go to C# script. As soon as you click on that, it will create a C# script file and it's ready to accept a name. Let's call this door controller. Now, we don't have enough time in these lectures to go over programming, but I'll try and point out a few tips and tricks to ensure that you get as least amount of bugs as possible. So let's open our file up. Here's our script file. Now, you double click on it and it will open up in a editor. Now, the default editor will be MonoDevelop or it will be Visual Studio if you're on Windows machine. Now, if you want to set it to this editor, which is called Sublime Text, there's instructions in the frequently asked questions section earlier on in the first section of this course that you can find out how to do this. I prefer to use Sublime because it's a lot simpler and it loads really quickly. When you first open a script file, it's going to look like this by default. Now, we called it door controller down here. Whatever you name it down here will become the name of this class. This here and this here has to be spelt exactly the same. So capitals and everything. You can't use spaces in any names, so make sure that it's one word. Now, if you need to have, like I've got here with door controller with 2, then you can have a capital D and a capital C, that's fine. But it is essential that this is named the same as your file down here. All right, so next we have a start function that Unity runs when your script first runs or when your object that the script is attached to comes into existence or starts to play within the game, I should say. And that runs once, and then you have an update function which will run over and over again. So whatever code you put in here runs over and over again each frame of the game. Okay, so let's just concentrate on what we're trying to do with our triggering. Unity provides a couple of functions that allow us to trigger events when we run into a trigger object which we've created on that cube. Okay, so the function that Unity will look for is on trigger enter. So let's just add that in here. So it's void on trigger enter collider obj. Okay, each function that you write must have an opening and closing squiggly brackets, as you can see here, and they must match. So ensure that you've got those. Then inside of this function here, which Unity will run when we run into that trigger, we're going to set some code that's going to open up the door. Or what it's going to do is grab hold of this is opening that's over here and set it to true, which will cause this transition here to run. Now, we can't just go is opening true as simply as that here, although it's kind of close. We have to do a little bit of setting up. So this code doesn't actually know about this structure here, and we need to make it aware of the door's animation states. So just at the top here, we're going to set up what's called a variable called an animator, and we'll call it anim. So this animator is referring to this animator here, which is going to grab any particular animator, and we're going to refer to it in our code as anim because that's easy to type. So currently this is just any old anim, but we want it to point to our one that is on the door. So down in the start function is where we need to sort of initialize or set up that. And the code for that is anim equals this dot transform dot parent dot get component animator rounded brackets semicolon. Okay, so that's a bit of a mouthful. So let's just save that with a Control S, and I'm going to explain what it's doing. So we're going to get hold of the animator that is attached to the parent of this particular object that the script is going to be attached to. And the script, if I just move this over here, the script is going to go onto the door trigger. So the script is running from the door trigger, and it's going to go to the parent of that object and grab its animator. So it will ensure that it's going to go up, get the parent, and then get this animator here, which will now have access to what's going on in these animation states. Okay, so let's just open up our code again. And then once we have hold of this anim, we can then trigger that is opening. So it would be anim.setBool. We give it the name of the Boolean value that we've created on our transition, which is this is opening. Has to be spelled exactly the same with the same capitalization. Is opening inside double quotes, and we're setting it to be true. And then a semicolon at the end. Okay, so this is what we need. Make sure that you've got everything spelt right, that you've got semicolons on the end of things that need semicolons. Most lines of code have a semicolon to say this is the end of the line of code, because you can wrap lines of code around. Things that don't have semicolons, you'll notice, are the function starter lines and our squiggly bracket lines. But these things, like that line has a semicolon and that line has a semicolon. Okay, so this is as hard as it gets as far as making sure that this value here gets set to true, and that will make this here run. Okay, when this trigger event happens. And this trigger event's going to happen when our character runs into that cube. Okay, so Control S to save that. Switch back to Unity. Now, I haven't shut down that editor window, and you don't need to either, because you might come back and forward between the editor window. If you get any errors in your code, you'll see red messages across the bottom, and you can go to your console window. If you can't find your console window, it's in Window and then Console down the bottom here, and that will bring it up. It'll show you a list of errors. It'll show you the line number that the errors are on as well. So just make sure that you've typed it exactly as I've just shown you. Now, this code isn't going to run because it's not actually inside of our hierarchy. We want to add that code onto the door trigger. So select the door trigger in the hierarchy, grab hold of the code, and drag and drop it onto that door trigger, and you'll see it appear here. Right, so if everything is now right, there's no errors, we should be able to press play and it will run. Okay, so let's walk up to the door. We go into there, and you'll notice that we've triggered the event for it to open. Now, if I walk away from the door, it's not going to close. So we also need to put in another piece of code that says when we've exited the trigger, then we would like the door to go into a closing animation. So hitting escape to get out of there. Let's go back into our code. And this time we're going to have an on trigger exit function, which is pretty much like this. So we can just grab all of that and Control C, and just underneath Control V, we change this bit here to exit. So we have an enter and an exit. And when we exit, we're going to set is opening to false, like that. Right, so then we save that and we go back into here and run. So if I walk up to here, the door will open. Now, the door's going to automatically close because that cube will go above our heads, which will cause an exit to occur because we've exited from inside of that cube. So it's not perfect yet. So a few other things we can do is to actually make this cube much bigger so that when the door's fully open, that cube still goes down to the floor. So just select it and resize it. Again, you hit the R key to resize it, then the W key to bring it down lower so that we can still run into it. Then when we press play and the door opens right up, that should still be on the ground, which will mean that we will still be inside that cube and the door won't shut until we walk back out again. So we're still inside that cube, it's not shutting, but if I walk back and walk outside of that cube, it will play the close animation. Okay, so that's getting there. The other thing that's not happening, so if I walk into this and then walk straight out again, it's still going to trigger it to open and it'll wait those few seconds before it closes again. We can force it to immediately close and immediately open. If we go into this close here, rather than waiting for those 3 seconds to occur, for that 1 second to occur before closing, we can go over into this inspector for the transition where we added is opening true, and you can turn off this has exit time. So it's not going to fully wait for the close state to finish running before it starts opening. And you can do that also with the open one as well, is that we can get rid of this has exit time so it won't stay fully open at the top. And finally, it looks pretty ugly to be walking around an environment with a huge big cube opening and closing the door. So select the cube and you can turn off its mesh renderer in the inspector here. So this is the part that's actually drawing the cube. If we just untick it, you'll see that you've still got the collider, which is in the green, but you're not going to be able to see it in the game. I use the cube's mesh render so that we can see what's going on when we're designing it, but we can turn it off when we go to play. So now when we play, we should be able to walk up to the door and it will open for us, and we can walk away and turn around and it should be closing behind us. And then we should be able to go back up and through it again. Okay, so that's how to create a trigger to control the transitions in our animation state diagram that is attached to our door object.